So yeah, I'm very delighted to talk about market access today, and I will give you a brief overview over the different ways to enter the German market. I will not only focus on the DiGA Fast Track, but we can clarify any upcoming questions about that in the Q&A maybe later. So first of all, let me share my slides with you. So that should be, can you see my slides now? There you go. All right, so Hendrik gave the first talk in the series, so you probably know the Health Innovation Hub team. Just a quick recap on this. We are a very small team, and I'm responsible also for the Fast Track, but some other medical device projects in the team. I'm a lawyer and economist by training, as Hendrik already pointed out. And now we will talk about what I will talk about today. So first of all, digital health products and services, what are we meaning when we're talking about that? There are different ways to tackle this definition. And one thing that is important for the DiGA Fast Track, but also for many other market access ways here, is that you have a solution that might include hardware, might include human services, but the software is the main driver of the whole thing. It is a medical device. Software as a medical device. You see that abbreviation here, SAMD, software as a medical device. You might not know about it yet, but I will tell you a little bit about that. So we are not talking about lifestyle apps that don't have any medical benefit or use. We don't talk about software that is storing data, archiving data, or it's just for communication or something like this. And we're not only talking about native apps for smartphones, we're also talking about browser-based applications. We are talking about classical software that you buy on a CD-ROM or a USB stick, or software as a service. And if you think that your solution that you developed here, the digital solution, works somehow, you might ask yourself, so what are the steps to do? First of all, of course, you have to develop it somehow. Yeah, that's something that you know much more about than I do. Hendrik knows a lot about that as well. And then you already heard about privacy and data security issues, especially in Germany, but all over Europe. And then after some time, you have to think about this medical device regulation. So the regulation of medical devices. I'm not talking about the European medical device regulation in particular here. And at the very end, you're also thinking about getting reimbursed for the whole thing. You want to make some money with it, maybe. So, and this is what we're talking about when we're talking about market access. Right? These two steps, medical device regulation for software and the reimbursement. And most importantly, there's the reimbursement at the very end. So reimbursement on which market is the next question. And as I said, I will talk about Germany. So the German healthcare market basically mainly consists of the statutory health insurances, which is a massive system, is one of the largest integrated healthcare systems. You see the figures here on the left. So it's really huge. And the whole thing has a uniformly defined standard care. So wherever you go, to which doctor or hospital you go, you get the same treatment and everything is paid for by the health insurance. You don't even have to pay in advance and get reimbursed or something like this. As a patient, you just like go there, flash your card, your health insurance card, and you get the treatment that you need. You can choose whatever healthcare professional you want to choose, but at the same time, we have very segregated sectors. We have that inpatient, outpatient sector that are not very combined. So they are like silos. They are working mostly by themselves, and they are following different rules also when it comes to reimbursement of services. And also we have a system of self-administration of the payers and providers, the healthcare providers, and very fragmented regulatory competencies when we're talking about hospitals, the inpatient setting. There's also the different states in Germany that have quite some responsibility. So all in all, when we're talking about digital solutions What is important to know is that there are several different ways for innovations to enter this system, and this highly depends on the scope and the usage scenario of the specific digital service or product. So here's a selection of different pathways into the statutory health insurance, which is the bigger market in Germany in comparison to the private insurances. And in the middle, you see this book SGB 5. It's the social code book number 5, which is regulating the whole statutory health insurance. And what I want to focus on today is the medical aids pathway, the trial of methods, so methods that are used by doctors, by clinicians, integrated care, and last but not least, of course, the DiGA fast track that Raoul already mentioned is omnipresent at the moment. So let's have a closer look at these different pathways. As I said already, the scope of the digital products is very important. Oh, what is also important is when you're using your software in treatment, also together with hardware, it's usually a medical device. So you need a CE marking for this. And this is just a quick detour that we're taking here. So the medical device regulation, there's also the European regulation called MDR, is the first hurdle if you want to enter the market in Germany or in Europe, whether you want to sell your product to self-payers, whether you want to go for a DiGA fast track application, whether you want to have the software and hardware combination as a medical aid. Whatever comes in the reimbursement step, first comes the medical device regulation. And within this medical device regulation system that we have in the European Union, it's a uniform system. So whether you're based in Belgium, France, Germany, or Slovakia, you always have to follow the same procedure and follow the same rules. So here we have a differentiation between risk classes of different medical devices. And you might ask yourself, like, where does software fit in this? I gave here some examples for class 3, the pacemakers, for example, highest risk, that have to fulfill higher requirements than a standard plaster with no other function than just covering a wound. And what is important in this medical device regulation system is that we're at the moment, we're at the in a transition period between the former regime, which is Medical Device Directive, the MDD, to the MDR, the Medical Device Regulation, which is much stricter in many senses, and especially when it comes to software. So software in general under the MDR regime is categorized in a higher risk class than beforehand. Practically the class number 1, which has like very low requirements, that you just certify yourself as a producer or manufacturer, is practically not existent for software as a medical device anymore. The clinical evaluation also has much higher standards now. We have a very strict equivalence for literature review. So if you want to use clinical trials that have been conducted for other devices for your own device, so you have the literature, you didn't conduct the trial yourself, you just have the literature, you have to prove that there's a very strict equivalence between that product and your product. And also at the moment, we have very few notified bodies which you need for the certification as of class 2A. Some class 1 devices are in there as well, but basically as of class 2A, you need a notified body, which is TÜV, DEKRA, all these companies that are basically certifying your quality assurance system. And we have very few of these at the moment under the MDR regime, while in the MDD regime, we had like all across Europe, we had more than 50, I think. At the moment, we have 17 notified bodies for the MDR system. So all in all, this is just a quick detour. As I said, I don't want to go into too much detail here, but you should always consider this CE marking as the first hurdle, and you should consider it early on. Plan ahead when you start developing your device or your software. Think CE marking already. And in the case that you have to achieve the CE marking, then you should probably get some help also from some professionals. There are quite some consultants out there that can help you with that. So, but now let's go back to the reimbursement part. And let's first have a quick glance at the scope. Your software, your digital tool is used by healthcare professionals, either in the stationary therapy, the inpatient setting, or the ambulatory therapy, the outpatient setting. So here we have a very interesting pathway for the methods, like the healthcare professional is using a certain method on their patient, and in doing so is using the software that you developed. In the stationary setting, we have this general system of a permit with a ban reservation. So basically, what that means is you can sell your device. Here you see this little floppy disk. You can sell it to any hospital. They can use it, your software, your medical device software, and they are basically getting reimbursed for that by the health insurances, which is this little skyscraper here on the very right. In the ambulatory therapy, so in the outpatient setting, when you want to sell your device, your medical device to physicians, we have a different, and in the stationary therapy, so the Joint Federal Committee, the highest decision-making body in the self-administration, can ban this reimbursement afterwards, but first you can just sell it. In the ambulatory therapy, it's the other way around. So a doctor might buy your software, your medical device, and use it, but he's not getting reimbursed for that. As long as there is not a decision by the Joint Federal Committee, the GBA, about this method being acknowledged, especially with regards to its medical benefit. So then we have like some specific structures. I just want to flip through this, but very quickly. But basically, in the stationary therapy, which is important, what is important is that the reimbursement works on lump sums on these diagnosis-related groups. So basically, if the diagnosis-related group contains enough money to use a certain software, then everything is fine. If it's not high enough, the lump sum that the hospitals are getting there, then they have to apply for a higher reimbursement at this INEC, a very mysterious institute in the German healthcare sector that no one knows much about. And in the ambulatory therapy, we have this at the very beginning. We need this method assessment by the Joint Federal Committee. Once we have a positive method assessment, so the Joint Federal Committee says like, yes, this software is working in the framework of this therapeutic or diagnostic method, then we have a reimbursement decision by another joint committee, which is about the reimbursement, and then the doctors get their money. Also, there's this Joint Federal Committee procedure about trials. If there is a new medical device on the market, the producer, the manufacturer, can apply to the Joint Federal Committee for a trial decision. The trial decision of the Joint Federal Committee means basically that the device can be used in a method by the healthcare professionals, and at the very end of the trial period, the decision by the Joint Federal Committee is made about the benefit of the medical device and therefore about its reimbursement in the ambulatory therapy. So all in all, what's the problem with these GBA-based or Joint Federal Committee-based procedures is that, first of all, they are not very specific with regard to digital solutions. So there are no digital requirements set out in any of the rules here. And the procedures are quite long. So more than 3 years for such a procedure is not unusual. So let's talk about ambulatory therapy and the software, the digital service or product used by the patients. Here we have a system that has been in place for many years now, which is the medical aid. Medical aids, as you see on the top right, can be a guiding dog or a hearing aid or a wheelchair. All these are medical aids, and for reimbursement, medical aids should be listed in the medical aid registry the so-called Hilfsmittelverzeichnis at the GKVSV, the federal umbrella organization of the statutory health insurance funds. And in this medical aid registry, we have specific requirements, more or less specific requirements about how to accept a new product in this registry. Once it's registered, doctors are pretty safe to prescribe it to their patients. So what's the thing with software here? We have by now we have some software devices in the medical aid registry listed as well, especially for diabetes therapy. But one big problem here with this system is that it's based at the GKVSV, this umbrella organization of the health insurance funds. And this basically means the one who is deciding about the acceptance and the reimbursement is only the statutory health insurances themselves. And as you might guess, health insurance funds are not like too prone to have a new solution in the system that they have to pay for in addition to already existing solutions. Also, what is really a showstopper here is that the requirements are super unclear, not rather unclear. I wrote rather unclear. That's very diplomatic. It's super unclear. So especially if you want to bring in a completely new device that doesn't fall under the categories that are already in the medical aid registry, then you're really like lost, like in front of court or so. What is also important is that if there is a new method that is induced by this medical aid, then we need a GBA, a Joint Federal Committee decision again, and then we have again a very long procedure. So this is the background in front of which we developed this DiGA Fast Track for digital health applications. And a digital health application can be every medical device, so it has to be certified, that falls under the class 1 and 2A. You might remember that class 1 is probably not very feasible anymore for software under the new MDR regime, but the provisional rules of the MDR, which allow you to enter the market following the requirements of the MDD, are also applying here. So a medical device class 1 or 2A under the MDD is at the moment also allowed to apply for this DiGA Fast Track. The intended use has to be centered on the patients, possibly connecting to the doctors, but the patient is in the center of the usage scenario. So that's why what we're talking about at the moment. The main function has to rely on digital technologies. That's also something that I already said at the beginning. If you connect it to hardware, the software has to be the driver. Like the effect has to come from the software rather than from the hardware. And the functionalities are pretty much the same as for every medical device. There are some exceptions. So, for example, prevention is not included, or contraception. So this is a very nice procedure that at the very end makes software as a medical device prescribable in the German healthcare system. So every doctor can prescribe the DiGA, this software, to every patient that needs it. It's independent of any GBA assessment, so we are independent of these long procedures. The procedure at BfArM, which is a federal authority, it takes only roughly about 3 months, so it's pretty quick. And we have specific digital requirements. That's of course, very important for something that is specifically designed for digital health applications. And we have adapted evidence requirements, which is also very important, because we are not only relying on the randomized controlled trial anymore, but we are also accepting real-world evidence here. And which is really new to this system is we have a consistent 12-month trial period that you can apply for. So if you have some basic evidence that your tool is working, you can apply for this 12-month trial period and get if BfArM accepts you, puts you in your DiGA into the registry, then you can the DiGA can be prescribed. and you can generate more evidence, real-world evidence, being on the market already. Anyhow, this is super great, but we have still some questions here. What about hard and software combinations? Hardware, to a certain extent, is included. We also have some questions about human services. What about dietitians that are somehow getting involved, or psychotherapists that are getting involved in the background? Although psychotherapists are not that much of a problem, but psychologists are, because psychotherapists are already in the system and get reimbursed for that. Also, we still didn't come up with any idea for the risk classes 2B and 3, so it's only the lower risks of medical devices, and software that is focusing on prevention and has other functionalities is not included yet. So we still have some question marks here, but this is a major breakthrough, and worldwide the first structured pathway into such a consistent system, as far as we know. We also wrote a book about this. I think Henrik already made some advertisement for this. So it's not out in English at the moment, but if you want to know more about the DiGA Fast Track, you can read everything about it here. But now let's come to the next pathway, which is basically having the broadest scope, and that is about stationary therapy, ambulatory therapy, and used by the healthcare professionals or the patients. And here we have this integrated care system, which is based on selective contracts between the manufacturer of a medical device and the health insurances and the healthcare professionals, including the patients that have to sign a contract as well. The funny thing about this is you have to have contracts with everyone. At the end, you remember at the very beginning, I showed you the figures of the German healthcare system. We have 105 health insurance funds. So if you want to cover the whole statutory health insurance patients, you would have to have 105 health insurance funds that are willing to have a contract here about your device. And physicians don't like contracts, and they have to have a contract with their health insurances as well. But there's some light at the end of the tunnel, so to say. There are some insurance funds that are much bigger. So if you have contracts with the biggest 5 health insurance funds, you already roughly cover 40% of the insured people in Germany. Last but not least, a very brief look on rehabilitation, because a lot of software medical devices are also focusing on rehabilitation. Is the system of rehabilitation in Germany is very fragmented. So we have individual decisions of the payer organizations, the insurance funds, and contracts with the providers of rehabilitation services. And the whole thing is framed, that's the blue frame here, framed by different books of the social code, and also framed by a GBA directive, and is a very complicated system. And there are no consistent and structured requirements for reimbursement of certain methods, and especially not for software. Software was just not thought of when they drafted all these laws back in the days. So what to do now? I told you a lot about these different pathways and about their drawbacks. So first of all, what is very important is at the very beginning, early on, when you're developing your product, define the scope and the usage scenarios of this product as specifically as possible. So think about who's your customer. Is it the doctors? Is it hospitals? Is it patients? Is it used in therapy? Is it used in diagnosis? Is it used in rehabilitation or whatever? Get knowledge on these potential pathways that you could enter into the system through, and the specific requirements. Use them, think of them as business cases. It's not just like regulatory bullshit, it's business cases. You know, that's where you, at the very end, earn your money with. And always think CE marking comes first, because the requirements of these different pathways that I just showed you are coming on top of the requirements of the medical device regulation. And thinking of this, you should also carefully assess the intersections of the authorization, the CE marking process, and the reimbursement requirements, because sometimes, for example, when it comes to clinical evidence, you can just from the very beginning design your trials, if you have to conduct any, design your trials for the CE marking already in a way that they help you with the reimbursement later on. Last but not least, digital innovation is no end in itself. We are not innovating just for innovation. Innovation has to generate new outcomes that matter for the patients, and you have to have proof that your solution is having these or producing these outcomes. So you need evidence. Even if you are a techie, even if you are a business administration person, think about, at one point you need to talk to clinicians and have like a trial conducted or whatever to find out whether your solution is really helping to address a certain and specific and existing problem. And then last but not least, in all these different to-dos, you can get help from someone out there. So what not to do when you're at the point of bringing your medical device on the market. Don't think you're too cool for school. We sometimes have this, that people are developing like something in a very early stage. They develop like a very cool and very nicely looking tool, like a very flashy app, and they have everything in place, and they even are compliant with the GDPR, with the General Data Protection Regulation, the European one. And they think like, okay, everything is cool. We are so cool. Everything works out. I don't have to care about all the other things anymore. No, that's not like this. You have to deal with regulators. You have to deal with clinicians. You have to deal with patients. Don't think just because from a tech side or a business administration side you have everything under control, it means that you have a valid business case. But last but not least, no, at the very end, like the most important thing is, like I told you about these pathways now, and I told you about some of the requirements there, and it sounds very complicated. The German healthcare system is very complicated, but it's also a very interesting market, and the patients here are also quite interested in getting new technologies into their hands. So you should aim for that, and you shouldn't panic just because there are like these different pathways and everything. So don't be afraid to just give it a try. And with that, I'm coming to an end